While I have vague memory of watching parts of King Kong Escapes on afternoon television when I was still just a little kid visiting my grandparents, and I know I read about Godzilla, Mothra, and the rest thanks to the Crestwood House books in the children's section of the local or school library, which, as an aside, convinced me that there really were two different endings to 1962's King Kong vs. Godzilla. But otherwise, my exposure to kaiju movies was minimal. As I got older and was able to start finally seeing monster movies, as opposed to just reading about them, I never really drifted toward the Japanese films, or anything really other than the Universal monster movies. I eventually expanded my horizons, and even after launching Monster Kid Radio, my kaiju diet was lacking. It wasn't until I, along with Monster Kid Radio irregular Scott Morris, who hasn't been on the show in way too long, was able to see the aforementioned King Kong vs. Godzilla at the Hollywood Theater in Portland, Oregon on April 24th, 2002. Maybe saying it changed me is a bit of an exaggeration, but it did open my eyes to a subset of classic monster movies I'd been missing all along. Inspired by that movie, I went on a movie-watching spree, watching all the Godzilla films, all the Mothra films, hopping studios and watching the Gamera movies, and even dipping into things like the non-Toho, non-Daiei film The X from Outer Space, which is now one of my favorites, and, strangely, I never have covered on any of my own podcasts, but I did join Record All Monsters' Robert Kelly to talk about it on his podcast. If you've been paying attention to the previous incarnation of this podcast, since then, or even half of the t-shirts in my wardrobe, you'll already know that I'm now a huge fan of all things kaiju and tokusatsu. And being able to share that love with a person that I love has been a monstrous gift. My wife Beth has never seen the original Godzilla before watching it for this episode of The Bride of Monster Kid Radio. We are kicking off episode 4 of The Bride of Monster Kid Radio with the song Catsumi from the band Cosmic Chickens. It's from their self-titled album, which you can find over at cosmicchickens.bandcamp.com. My name is Derek M. Cook, the writer, host, and producer of this show. I'd like to welcome you to the show. I hope you enjoy what we have lined up here. We're going to be talking about Godzilla, the original Godzilla from 1954. And as I said during the hook, during the very opening of the show, Beth has never seen it. Now, I know we've talked about Godzilla here on the show in the past. It comes up quite a bit, and we've given the movie a good solid look-see once or twice, I'm sure, in the past decade or so that we've been podcasting here. But Beth had never seen it before, and I'm excited to get her point of view on this classic kaiju film. It really is one of the best, and he is the king of the monsters. Let's see if my queen of the monsters, or bride of the monster? Whatever. Let's see what Beth thinks. And that's going to be coming up here shortly. Plus, we've got Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review. We've got a lot of kaiju tokusatsu excitement in this episode of Bride of Monster Kid Radio. We've got Godzilla. We've got Mark talking about Ultraman Ace. It's going to be a good show. Why don't we go ahead and get to that right now?
Beyond the stars come the most fearsome monsters in the galaxy. Only Godzilla stands in their way in Godzilla on Monster Island. Is even Godzilla strong enough to defeat the invaders? Matching unbelievable strength. Exchanging incredible death-dealing rays. Don't miss Godzilla on Monster Island. Rated G.
The terror shock that can't be stopped. You're not God. You're not even human. You murdered those men, and you made me a murderer, too. Weird experiments of accursed scientists turn human beings into living hybrid hell monsters. Now you hold hands with the devil. Now you run. Run for your life from the terror, the torment, the torture inflicted by Satan's ambassador of evil. The next victim could be you. Or you. Or you. Caught forever by the curse of the fly.
Live from the land of light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Ultraman Ace, Episode 19, The Mystery of the Haunted Kappa Mansion. A young boy named Yasuo has numerous problems. He's known for talking rubbish, as his mother says, but unfortunately for him, he witnesses a terrible monster in a residential neighborhood. No one believes him, but when his friends and his sister begin behaving strangely, he follows them to the weird house on the block, where he makes a chilling discovery and ends up in the hospital. Tak looks into the matter, and it becomes apparent that the entire scenario is meant to entrap Hokuto. It works, and Hokuto finds himself treading water in a pool on top of Kaiju King Kappa's head. If Ultraman Ace is going to intervene, Minami must find a way to join Hokuto in the water of that precarious pool. Debuting on August 11th, 1972, The Mystery of the Haunted Kappa Mansion is a wild ride, culminating in the appearance of a giant monster with an in-ground swimming pool on top of its head. The monster in question, King Kappa, is a takeoff on the Kappa of Japanese yokai, or ghost folklore. Although, in this story, the folkloric elements are left unaddressed, and King Kappa bears only a passing resemblance to the legendary water creatures. As is often the case with Ace, the spookiest moments happen in the first half of the episode, this time involving children whose bodies are undergoing changes in a manner reminiscent of the 1963 Toho chiller Matango, aka Attack of the Mushroom People. I wouldn't call this a classic episode, but I respect its audacity. The sheer fun of imagination is on full display. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
The world's mightiest monster meets the world's mightiest menace. King Kong, bigger, stronger, more ferocious than any living creature, faces his greatest challenge in King Kong Escapes. For now, Kong meets his greatest foe, a duplicate King Kong created by an evil genius, built of indestructible super steel, 60 towering feet of invincible robot. King Kong, who can defy the might of modern artillery, tanks, missiles, the vast strength of prehistoric monsters, clashes with the Kong of Steel in the battle of the century in King Kong Escapes. All new, all thrilling, more fantastic than ever, King Kong Escapes. A Toho Company limited picture, universal release in Technicolor.
That is an incredible motion picture. An entire town goes berserk when a giant underwater creature attacks all human life. That is a frightening experience. Don't miss that.
Have something to share with Bride of Monster Kid Radio? You can email the show at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 360-524-2484.
The only good human is a dead human!
The bizarre world you met on the planet of the apes was just the beginning. What lies beneath may be the end. 20th Century Fox takes you beneath the planet of the apes. This is the year 3955 AD. The apes are building a war machine aimed at planet domination. Superhuman mutants strike back with new and terrifying weapons of the mind. In the atomic rubble of what was once the city of New York, civilization's final battle is about to begin.
The only good human is a dead human.
Beneath the planet of the apes, with James Franciscus, Kim Hunter, Maurice Evans, Linda Harrison, and Charlton Heston. Can a world long endure half ape, half man? The answer lies deep beneath the planet of the apes. In color, rated G, general audiences.
This is Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned. And don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
You can play with that.
Wow. What was that?
If you play with it on the thing, you can turn it into like a Godzilla scream.
You are very confident in my audio editing capabilities. I think that's going to throw my leveling program out of whack. I mean, it was bad enough last week when you howled for the werewolves. Wow.
I don't roar real well. Well, I mean, I had the zombie roar going at our haunt this year, but it pretty much blew out my throat, so I don't do that right now because I want to be able to sing Christmas carols because it's almost Christmas, and what says Christmas better than 160-foot ancient dinosaur gone nuclear? I mean, he lights up.
Wow. Okay. I do have 2 or 3 kaiju-themed Christmas ornaments somewhere in storage right now.
Yeah.
I'd like
3, 5, 6, 7.
I know I have at least 1 Godzilla and 1 King Ghidorah.
There were 4 on that little shelf.
Yeah, that's true. I do have those. And now I want to see a Christmas kaiju movie. How would that work?
Well, it'd be in Japan, so there would definitely be KFC involved.
I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Godzilla.
Godzilla!
You just got a little bit of insight into the kind of conversations that this monster couple gets into.
Yeah, we get into the deep nitty gritty. I mean, we pick the whole thing apart, pick the bones clean.
Yeah, this isn't just for show. This is our everyday life. So we are talking about Godzilla from 1954, the original Godzilla.
The OG.
The OG, G standing for Godzilla. Mm-hmm. Before we get into things, Beth, I do want to ask you the same thing that I asked you last week.
Yep.
What's your experience with Godzilla?
I have seen more of the modern films, and of course we saw, was it -1? Is that what that one was called? Which I really love.
We've seen -1 and Shin Godzilla together.
Shin Godzilla, yeah, that's true.
And we've covered them on the show. Check the archives for Monster Kid Radio episode whatever.
And Mecha Godzilla.
Oh, that's right. We did go see that one.
And I've seen 2 of the American ones that are more they're more Americanized and they're more CGI and they don't have the same, they're not made the same way. That to me is different.
When you say American, do you mean the Matthew Broderick one?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I've seen the recut, if you will, which is 56.
Oh, Godzilla King of the Monsters.
I've seen the recut of the original, but I hadn't seen the original. And wow, what an interesting difference to see something that was cut for a Japanese audience versus something that was clearly cut for a 1956 American, let's all go and live it in Levittown audience. You know, it very much feels that way, don't you think?
Now, I'm not including Mothra in this.
Well,
breakdown
yeah, and
'cause
then
it's
I've seen
not-
Mothra,
yeah.
and I've seen some like Godzilla cartoons and things, and shorts and things like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, this was great to see the original because, of course, what I kind of love the most is the suit work and the models and the way that those interact and all of that. So yeah, this was really exciting. Before we dive too deep in, and definitely before, I mean, can you have spoilers on a movie that's 70 years old? I feel like if you haven't seen it by now, pause this and go watch and then come back, because how do I know what's a spoiler and what's not after 70 years of Godzilla? Which, by the way, is apparently, according to Guinness Book of World Records, the longest continuous movie franchise.
There's been so many Godzilla movies, and there's another one coming, and we can talk about that here in a little bit. But what were you going to say?
I was going to say that we had some lovely feedback from listeners, and one of those listeners brought up the point of how do you properly say the name of the monster in these movies. It's true that, you're sitting across from me in a shirt that says Gojira, Gojira.
It does.
It does, yeah, it does. I know what I've read. Photographic memory, remember? Anyway, and that is definitely a way that it gets spelled, especially when it's spelled for Japanese audiences. We would spell it Godzilla. For American audiences, using the word God in it gives that connotation of a super being or a deity or something that's bigger, larger than life, I think. And so using Godzilla and spelling it that way is great. The truth is, because Japanese doesn't have all the same sounds that English has, you were never going to have a perfect spelling fit between the hiragana in Japanese and writing it out in Latin letters or Phoenician letters in English. It was never going to be perfect because you just don't have the same sounds.
Right.
Like we use R, they don't use R. Not the way, they don't have an R that sounds like our R. And L's are different and other things. Z is different. And even D can be softer or harder depending on what your symbol is that you're using. Some of this knowledge is coming from the fact that our oldest daughter's been studying Japanese for about 8 years and is pretty darn proficient. I mean, she watches anime without subtitles. So, I figure if you can do that, that's pretty fluent. And we've talked about this, she and I, with Godzilla specifically, and some of the other kaiju and their names, and why they are what they are, and how some of the other kaiju mean certain things when you are using the writing in Japanese. Because the way that they can combine symbols, sometimes two symbols together can mean something totally different than each symbol apart, or sometimes they actually make puns out of things in the way that they write it to be clever. And so some of the other kaiju names in the expansion of the franchise in Godzilla's world are quite clever. So whatever way you say it, though, I think if you're in an American audience, American setting, Godzilla is probably the norm and perfectly fine. If you want to try to be literal and learn Japanese pronunciation and go a little closer to Gojira, which still sounds like Godzilla, depending on what your accent is, that's okay too. The fact is, he's a king of the monsters, and it doesn't really matter how you pronounce it as long as you respect him. I
was trying to think of any other kaiju that have that same naming.
Mothra.
Yeah, Mothra.
It's more like Mothra in.
And Rodan over here actually is Radon.
Radon, yeah.
Over there. But I think that was less about the pronunciation issue and more about radon, radiation, that sort of thing.
Detectors, yes.
Yeah, and changing.
So taking a word that was already an English word that people knew, and then applying it to a monster that was supposed to be radioactive just made a lot of sense. And that is, and if you look at that's one of them. I don't remember exactly what it ends up meaning, but it's kind of clever. Yeah. If you look at what radon looks like, and it's both a play on, yes, radon like radiation, but also his name then means something that has to do with his shape. So
and see, Rodan's my guy. I love Rodan. He's my favorite of the Toho kaiju.
That's right. I know you've said that before.
And for you, I think it's Mothra, right?
Yes, Mothra. Yeah.
That's not.
I mean, she comes with her own backup singers, like. And also, like, she's cool both in, like, worm form and when she gets wings. Like, everybody else's upgrade is like, oh, now my spikes glow. It's not that big of an upgrade. Or, like, my tail's longer or something, or I have a fifth head, or I don't know, whatever it happens to be.
But what about
with Mothra, she's like, wings!
But what about Shin Godzilla, where he's got, like, 3 forms throughout the entire movie?
I actually enjoyed that part of it. I do. That's one of the things I really liked about Shin Godzilla was that he kind of Pokemon'd his way up and evolved as it went on. Because there is this theory of potential hyperevolution, and the more we damage the planet and the more radiation we put into things, the more likely we are to trigger hyperevolution.
Yeah.
Probably not on that scale, but in terms of viruses, in terms of plants mutating into things that could be poisonous or bad for us, or even animals just becoming fiercer or nastier.
Mm-hmm.
It's hyperevolution is a thing that can happen, and adding radiation or other pollution is not helpful. And I really like the general message of the Godzilla movies of let's not destroy the world. I think especially on some of the American ones, we get a little more into just let's have a big fight with monsters. But the original, it really, really, really ties into that idea of the United States was kind of a monster in a way to come in and drop atomic weapons on Japan, and the fallout, both literal and figurative, from that, created decades on decades of problems, both health-wise, economically, structurally. So much of the islands were destroyed, not just in the atomic attacks, but like the bombing of Tokyo, which I think could be akin, if you look at the way that some of the explosions happen as Godzilla goes through buildings, it feels like the similar pattern of explosions as when you would have a B-2 come through and drop bombs, boom, 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 one after another. The buildings implode and fall down and start burning and catch fire. And so it feels very similar in that way, I felt like. And there's definitely a heavy metaphor there. And I know some of the things I was reading about it said that they actually have studied it, and the film for Japanese people at the time, for many of them, was a way to sort of come to terms with the end of the war and how things had gone, and that, they could see themselves in Godzilla and in the fact that, hey, maybe they'd been triggered to do these things and make these attacks. And so then coming back and stopping them. Well, yes, you have to stop the monster, but it's not the monster's fault if they were triggered to do the thing. And I know that whole idea of pride and honor in the Japanese culture would have been sorely tested at that time period in history.
So there's a bunch of things that we just dropped. First of all, we still both love Godzilla, despite us saying what we said about Mothra and Rodan being our favorites. Godzilla's
he's king. He's king. Absolutely.
I'm going to say this, and I don't know if this is a hot take or a drop the mic moment, but I feel like Godzilla 1954 really does do a lot of that. Talk about how Japan is recovering from the war and what they're doing and how they're processing their still lingering grief over what happened to them and that sort of thing because of what happened in the war. I don't know if those themes had been really touched on again until Godzilla -1. I feel like all the other Godzilla movies up in between there touch on other things that are similar, but I think Godzilla -1 is the first one in its 50-plus year run to get back to that.
Well, and one of the things that struck both myself and my father, who loves movies of the 1950s, and he loves anything to do with World War II. We used to joke that his favorite channel was the Hitler channel, right? The History Channel.
The History Channel before it was all aliens.
And digging up gold that's not there.
Shout out to Steve, who loves that show.
Love you, Steve. They're never finding anything. But...
Anyway.
Is that Steve Sullivan?
Yeah.
Oh, and congratulations to the new Sullivans. I saw on social media that we have a new couple in the Monster Kid family.
Shout out.
Congratulations to them.
Yep.
That's always, love is great, and I love love. All right, and I love Godzilla. So back to that. Yeah, I really enjoyed -1, and something that I talked about with my father, who loves both World War II movies, but also black and white movies of the 50s, because those were his 50-cent movies that he'd go to, or his quarter movies that he'd go to at the local theater on Main Street, you know, as a boy, because he grew up in the 50s. So that's what they did on a Saturday. They went to as many movies as they could fit in to avoid going home until they had to, so they wouldn't have to do extra chores, because Grandma would always find something for you to do. So he really liked Godzilla, but of course the one he saw was the 1956
Okay,
one.
so with Raymond Burr.
And I had watched that not too long before we saw Godzilla -1.
Okay.
And so it was, for me, like two sides of the same coin almost, of watching Raymond Burr's character navigate things was seeing it from the American point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you saw -1, you saw it from the point of view of just the everyday Japanese people. I mean, you were talking about just a gal and a guy that happened to be building their shacks next to each other, you know?
Yeah.
And now, seeing the original Godzilla, this is more from the point of view of the people in charge of Japan at that time, I felt like. I felt like you got more of that. You got more of the government structure in that, which feels to me a lot like some of the Ultraman that we've watched.
Some of the Ultraman, or even Shin Godzilla.
Even Shin Godzilla
really
had some of that.
Yeah.
And so I really like that, because it's such a different cultural structure and governmental structure. Of course, they're more parliamentarian, though they don't have a ruling monarchy the way the UK does. They do have some royal house members still, but they don't have any ruling capacity in Japan anymore. But it's just a very different way of coming to a decision. It's a different, meetings are differently done. The way that they all sit around in the chairs, the weird 70s like chairs. Even though it was the 50s, they had these like weird padded out chairs that they almost seem anachronistic in a way, but clearly they're not, because they were there. So it must have been very modern. Maybe that was it. It was supposed to look very modern. But they're all sitting around. It's not one guy just leading the meeting. People are giving suggestions, but you can tell there's a hierarchy of the older guys have more respect. They get to talk first, and maybe their ideas are given more credence, whether or not their ideas are better. And so some of the younger players in the government structure have to really work around that politeness in order to get the information across and save the day.
Yep.
But they still have to work within the system, and it's interesting to see that, and I think it gives a lot of insights into the Japanese culture, and then it gives you more information when you go back and rewatch -1 or Shin Godzilla or any of these, or Ultraman or Mothra or any of them, because now you understand where the whole system came out of, that after the war, everything's decimated, you have these few people in charge, this is how they're making decisions, and everything goes from there.
Yep.
And you really need to see the original in order to understand the rest of them. If you like the other ones, don't worry about it being an older movie. It holds up, and there is nothing for me that beats a guy in a suit for a kaiju movie.
Yes.
I know sometimes in the newer ones they've been like, okay, but the tail's got to be CGI or something, because that's the only way to make it work. And I'm willing to give a little on that on some of the newer ones, because I know they're also balancing what Hollywood is demanding from them.
Yes.
Which, wherever you're making it, their Hollywood demands are going to weigh on a full feature motion picture, feature length. So I get that, but man, the dude in the suit with the perfect, all the little miniatures and the town and all the fountains and the features and the cars and the train running through and everything, that is amazing. That's art. That's hundreds or thousands of hours of people's effort and their handmade, painstakingly done process that you just can't replicate with a computer. You're never going to have that same realism that you have when you actually put it together. And I've never been one that wanted to spend a lot of time making miniatures. I have friends that make like miniature rooms or things they put on a bookshelf between books and it looks like a doorway into a miniature world or something, and they do all the miniature food and things. It's never been my thing, but boy, when I see something well done, it's so amazing, and especially when it can translate on screen. Because it's one thing to make it and look up close with, a foot away through some glass at a Lego convention and you're seeing the details. It's a whole nother thing to have it translate from hundreds of inches or even feet away while something's destroying it and explosions are going off and wires are sparking, and yet the detail is still there and fine enough that it draws your attention. And I'm talking so long, Monster Kids, on this one, but I'm telling you, it really opened my Godzilla mind in new and cool ways. But yeah, nothing for me beats the guy in the suit actually doing the damage. Real damage is always more impressive than fake damage. So if you can make it real, make it real. I actually have wanted to do a class with my high school students, and it's something I might pitch for next year, of being able to do a movie making class where they have to build the real model and they have to actually, have build a monster and run down a city and, and film it and edit it in that simple, basic, old school way, because I have several students who are interested in film or working in media, but I think they need that background of this is where we began and this is where things started. Yes, maybe you're going to learn how to computer animate and do the lasers and the flashes and the bangs, and that's great. I'm all for getting prop guns that actually fire out of the system and just having stationary weapons and then special effects for muzzles and stuff. I think that's one of the best things CGI can do for us. But when it comes to the monster, please give me realism wherever you can.
So you've tapped into a lot of things that make this movie such an important movie in terms of monsterdom.
But also, I think, in just the history of film.
In the history of film, for sure, especially for Japan, especially for Toho. Now, they didn't invent the tokusatsu movement.
Right, I know.
But they popularized it.
Right.
And it wouldn't be as popular as it is if not for Eiji Tsuburaya, the man who designed all the special effects for Godzilla and a lot of the early Toho movies, and then would go on to create Ultraman. And would borrow the Godzilla suit and other techniques and items, I'm sure, for early Ultraman and Ultra Q appearances.
It's like how the BBC uses the same costumes over and over.
The what?
The BBC.
Oh, the BBC. Yeah. And Eiji Tsuburaya is a master, is a genius, and I love the models. And yes, sometimes, you can tell it's a model. But it doesn't matter because it's so bloody cool. And I love it. And, I love tokusatsu as I'm going to call it a genre. I don't know if it's fair to call it a genre, but it basically means special effects cinema. Yeah. And Japan's not just film, but theater heritage, goes all the way back to like kabuki theater and like the shadow puppets and all that, doing special effects and special effects techniques. And then it's translated to film and becomes this amazing thing.
Shadow puppetry is another thing that I actually want to get involved with. And there is a professional puppet theater here in Phoenix that I may end up auditioning for because they do things like that, and getting to just learn how to do a lot of that would be really cool. And I think would be fun to then be able to pass that stuff on to students and stuff. But yeah, so tokusatsu, is that tokusatsu?
Tokusatsu, yep.
I love that. And I think it works especially well for Godzilla because he's not a dinosaur. He's not a straight up dinosaur. Nobody's saying he's this dinosaur that we pulled out of the ground. And this is what he looks like. He's not exactly.
Not in this movie, but later on in the franchise, they refer to him as a Godzillasaurus.
Yeah, and I'm not. I've heard that, and I'm not sure. I'm like, okay, well, that just kind of sounds like there was during the 80s that time when dinosaurs got really, really popular, Land Before Time and the show dinosaurs and all the different stuff. Yeah. And I feel like maybe they added Saurus onto things just to tie into that.
We'll have to watch the 90s Godzilla films. They're pretty cool. Yeah. That's where it comes up.
But what I love with the whole idea of the suit, and you said sometimes you can tell it's a model, but who knows what a Godzilla looks like?
Yeah.
Because it's been irradiated, possibly by the United States. Critics differ on whether they're blaming the United States for that or not, although straight up the United States did drop nuclear material on the islands of Japan, so I mean, there's going to be some in the water. Of course, now we've had the earthquake and the leaks from the nuclear stations and stuff, so I feel like we should have a plethora of kaiju attacks at this point, and it seems like we haven't, so I'm like waiting for the other shoe to drop in a movie where they're like the Justice League of Kaiju, basically.
Okay.
But I mean, like the whole group of them, everybody together is like, this boot factory's polluting, and then they just go in and take them out. And
okay.
And then the shoe's on the other foot. No, I'm kidding.
Wow. Okay, I was like, why boot factory? All right.
So I can make a joke. But what I love about it is you don't know what a Godzilla looks like. So as long as it looks like it could be alive, and they go pretty reptilian, but they do a nice, it's not strictly scales. It's not strictly smooth.
Yeah.
It's kind of an in-between. And so it does feel like it's in between. It started with that older alligator level of dinosaur.
Sure.
That real scaly, old, snouty, that sort of thing. But now it's morphing into an upright lizard, more like a land lizard and stuff. And so that's why the skin is starting to smooth out and pull, and you're getting bigger, because it makes sense, is what I'm saying, evolutionarily speaking, that if you start with something very, very, very old, but now it's going to evolve into the next stage, this is what it would look like as it moved through those stages. You usually just don't see that because the same creature isn't passing through the stages. It's thousands of generations between stages when you evolve normally, but again, super evolution. So it's just really cool that you can see the real movement and the way that the skin flexes, how real skin would flex, and all those things that I feel like get kind of smudged out with CGI.
Yeah, I think so too. I love the design. I think there are a couple shots where it's clearly a hand puppet kind of poking up over a mountaintop.
Yeah.
And it looks a little, for lack of a better term, derpy.
By today's standards, yes.
But it doesn't matter because it's big, it's huge, and it looks awesome. I love the way it moves, and I love the sound that it makes, despite the fact that most reptiles don't have vocal cords and can't really make those kinds of sounds.
But see, he's evolving.
Yeah, so I love the sound of it, and because I'm bringing up the sound, I'm going to bring up the music. What did you think of Akira Ifukube's film score?
Oh, so beautiful.
Iconic, right?
It was so beautiful.
He did it in a week.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
he had a week.
Geniuses are like that.
He had a week.
They just, when they have to, they can't do anything till it's time, and then they pull it out of the hat. I know. Jin's like that. Our daughter, she does stuff like that, and it just amazes me.
It wasn't that he waited. He didn't get a chance to see the finished film until
right. No, I'm saying, process. But they can be waiting, and then all of a sudden have to do it, and now it happens. So it was so beautiful, and it really carried you along through the story. It was like you were kind of floating along on the score, which was nice. And so even when it was a dire moment and things, looked their darkest and everything, there was still enough rumble in the bass to still stay under you and kind of support you and make you feel like, okay, we're still moving forward. Things are going to keep moving forward. We're not done yet.
I think it's telling that it keeps surfacing in even modern Godzilla movies.
Yes.
It's in the Shin Godzilla score. I think it's in -1.
Yeah.
It keeps popping up. And it keeps popping up in places that have nothing to do with kaiju. I swear, whoever comes up with the entrance music for one of my favorite wrestlers, Samoa Joe, uses Godzilla as an inspiration, if not flat out aping Godzilla music for part of his entrance music. It's that iconic and pervasive in our pop culture.
There's even a moment in I know you haven't watched it. Don't worry. He's not a weirdo like that. But in Bridgerton, where in Bridgerton, it's of course set in the 1800s, and so everything's like violins and cellos, but they're actually playing modern music, but in like that style from back then. but it popped up in like the background while some characters are outside talking. All of a sudden, I'm like trying to listen to the music from the ballroom, and I'm like, that's Godzilla.
Are you serious?
Yeah. It's just like with violins and stuff. Because they needed something just to fill behind the conversation that wouldn't get people's attention too much. And I was laughing, like, oh, they're dancing to Godzilla in there.
I listen to a lot of film scores. It's my go-to. I love my surf music. I love my old school hip-hop and rap. I love my Iron Maiden. But film scores is my go-to. If I did one of those Spotify rank things or whatever, it'd come up all sorts of film music.
Well, you know, I love them. I mean, that's what I walked down the aisle. That's our whole wedding was film score music.
That's true.
And because we love them so much. And it's just, it's such an art. It's one thing to write 2 minutes and 30 seconds of music and have it say something and touch someone and make an impact. That's fantastic if it does, you know, and if your song does well, that's great. But to be able to stitch together 2 or 3 hours of music and have it all relate and have themes and have them interwoven and have things come back around and keep the audience's attention and, like I said, support them through the dark moments and then buoy them up on the light moments to help them get to that, you know, high emotion. It's an amazing thing to be able to do and to know how to write all the different parts of the orchestra or the band that are needed and know really how to do that without any computers at that point in time because you didn't have computers doing any of that. They're writing it all by hand and sitting there picking it out on a piano or whatever they had. So it's such an amazing skill, and to have it hold up this well 70 years on, I think is pretty impressive.
So there is a love triangle in this film. One of my favorite things about the best kaiju movies are when the story that has nothing to do with the monster is just as good.
Yeah.
And that's why I loved -1 so much. And that's one of the reasons why I love this one so much is there's this love triangle kind of sort of thing going on. There's the scientist, the scientist's daughter that has been promised to scientist's colleague, but there's somebody else who the daughter is really in love with.
And we're right at the point in time where Japan is switching from arranged marriages to more love matches. And so that is an important social issue for them to touch on. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you think of how that was portrayed and the way it was presented that, you know, we have to tell him, but we can't tell him right now. And, oh, he already knew the whole time and wished them the best before he commits basically, you know, a kamikaze style, you know, end.
To save the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Serizawa and all, which is an amazing character, by the way. How do you think that translates to today's audience? And what do you think about what it portrayed relationships as being like back then?
I actually thought it was a pretty healthy take that, you know, I understood the characters, especially her reluctance to say anything, and she didn't want to go against her family because that's not something that you do in Japanese society, I think even till today. I had a friend in high school who was an exchange student from Japan, and she had to check in with her family once a week and, you know, report back on certain things because you didn't go against your parents. That's just not something you do. And it felt like, yep, that was honored, but at the same time, in a very uniquely Japanese way, they gave a positive ending where the guy who stepped back could still be the hero. He still came out the overall hero.
Yeah.
And he was still her hero in the end.
Yeah.
Because of his sacrifice. And so it gave this idea that, okay, we can reinvest ourselves and sacrifice, and even if we don't see the benefits, the next generation will, or our loved ones will. And I think that's a very Japanese way to solve the love triangle problem. I don't think you would see that in many American movies where the guy would just step back and then sacrifice himself.
Especially in the 50s.
No, yeah, especially then, absolutely.
Especially in 50s.
No. The lead, you know, cowboy character has to win.
Yeah.
And he has to get the girl. That's there's no question.
Yeah. I also was quite taken this time around by the older scientist. This time around, I was watching him because I know, and this is a spoiler for you and anybody else, he's like one of the only existing characters that goes into the second film.
Okay.
Which did happen pretty quick. Godzilla Raids Again happened.
Well, because it was such a hit. Yeah.
It was the 8th highest grossing film in Japan that year. Godzilla was. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Toho's like, we got to do it. Let's crank out another one of these guys. I was actually listening to a bunch of Friday the 13th material yesterday at work, just listening to podcasts and all that, and it made me think of Godzilla. Yesterday was Friday the 13th, or as of this recording anyway, and Paramount was so happy with the money Friday the 13th made.
Yeah.
They immediately were like, we need a part 2.
Do it again.
Do it again. And it did so well, we got to do it again. And it did so well again, we got to do it again. And then they did it again, and they didn't do so well. So they took a couple of years to figure things out. But they just kept firing at the screen more Godzilla because this one did so well. And knowing that this guy was going to continue, I was wondering, what is it about his performance that makes him the guy that goes to the next film? I don't know if I figured out what that was, but I was pretty taken by his performance this time around because he's the guy that lived through World War II. The other characters are a younger generation, and maybe they did live through part of it, but they were really young. This is a guy who was active and maybe even involved in World War II, so he's got a different take on what's going on with Godzilla.
Okay, well, I guess I would relate it back to something that we talked about on a previous, not podcast, I guess it was a vlog.
Okay.
I think, when we went to see the new Indiana Jones film.
Okay.
Before that, we rewatched all of the others. Well, we rewatched the first 3 because there are 3. And now there's a 4th one.
Oh, we watched the 4th.
Okay, we watched them all. And actually the 4th one wasn't as bad. I saw some new things, so I was okay. Anyway, we reviewed that earlier. And one of the things we discussed was I found a new appreciation for the second Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
And I had a unique perspective.
Mm-hmm. Something that I had never heard before.
Where I said, look at it as if Short Round is telling the story to his children, and then see where the excesses and the extravagances in the story are. And you can kind of see what would be maybe a father over-exaggerating things because he's telling a story at the fireside to his kids. I think in this case, your scientist may be the one who's telling the story.
Okay.
And it's similarly in Star Wars, R2-D2 is telling the story as we move along because he's the only one who's there through all of the series of events. He moves forward in time, and you can see how it could be from his point of view.
Even more so than 3PO, you're right.
Because, 3PO gets his mind wiped at times. Like, he doesn't remember that Anakin made him, but R2-D2 never gets his brain wiped. So he remembers everything going all the way back. Well, that makes him the narrator. Reliable or not.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly, in many, many tales, unreliable narrators. I would say in the second Indiana Jones movie,
right.
Short Round is an unreliable narrator, right?
Sure.
But in the most adorable little boy way.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to look at, like, who's telling the story. Well, if he's continuing throughout the stories, he may be the one telling the story. Mm. And does he hand that off at some point? Because actors die eventually. So at some point you should do a handoff, I feel like. One of the best things I think that they've done in the James Bond series is to hand off M and Q directly. Yeah. Where you saw the handoff on screen and made it clear that, yes, we are passing the torch or the screwdriver or the gun or whatever.
The exploding
pen onto the next guy. And I think that's a nice thing to do when you need to move on with something like that. It's sad when an actor dies and now you just have to recast, and then you're like, this is awkward.
So I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch Godzilla Raids again. Darn, to see if I can pick up on any of that.
Okay.
But that's a good one too. And I don't know if I've talked about Raids again here on the show. I know we've talked about Godzilla before, but getting Beth's point of view, especially having never seen it before, I'm glad she was so taken by it.
But if you take that and you say it's from his point of view, he may be looking at things like the relationship in the love triangle with rose-colored glasses because he's trying to be polite because he's Japanese. So he's going to kind of soften the edges of the story a little, and that
was very important.
Everyone's going to come out honorable in the end, and the guy even who kind of got rejected gets to be the hero, and there's no question that he's the hero, and he clearly did everything right, and he's not jealous or upset about it. He's just going to be the hero, and that's really important. And so I think if you're looking at it from his point of view, I can see those things being softened in the way they are. And it's important that it be told that way at that time. Now, later Godzilla movies, I know the ones I've seen, do not have that same conscience towards what will either offend or please the Japanese people that I think this first one does.
Sure.
And definitely the 56 re-edit does not.
Right.
It's very much for an American audience and to make them feel okay about what went down, and even almost suggest... I felt like in the 54 version, oh yeah, this might be America's fault. And in the 56 version, it's like, what did Japan do? Oh man, they're always getting up to things. Now they've got a monster problem. We're going to come in and save the day. It kind of feels like that from the United States point of view, you know. And it's very 1950s U.S. It's very,
Maybe a little bit. I need to rewatch the 56 too, darn. I love that one too. I actually really enjoy it.
Oh, I enjoy it too, but it's a different... You're
It
seeing
is.
the same story from a different point of view. And so now we have 3 points of view on the same story at the same time, I feel like. Because
Yeah.
I feel like you have -1, you have the original, and you have
Wow.
56, and it's all about the same basic incident. But because you're seeing it from different points of view, you might be seeing different scenes because different characters are involved in different things.
Yeah.
But it's so... I think that would be fun to chart and kind of see how they all line up and overlap and... You know, how much is there consistency and how much do we need to allow for each one is told from a different point of view. And so you're going to have some inconsistencies just because people's memories are imperfect. And also what we remember clearly might be different. What's important to me when I view a scene is different than what's important to you. And we're going to remember different details.
Sure. I think one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had watching Godzilla and Godzilla 56 is watching it with the director's commentary on a Criterion release, where you watch the director's commentary from Godzilla 54, and you get to the end of it, and the commentary track... Did I say director's commentary? It's not the director, it's some scholar. But you get to the end of it, and he says, and this was fun, and we're going to keep this going on the Godzilla King of the Monsters commentary track. Join me over there. And you go and you click on it, and he's like, okay, welcome back. Now let's continue our conversation.
I think that'll be the next night for me, but yeah.
Yeah, and I loved it. I was like, that's amazing. I loved that so much. I really like that I love that you loved it.
So this is something I wondered about, and I would like to hear from the Monster Kids, and Derek will go over at the end of the podcast how to get a hold of us, because you don't want to stop and do it right now. You want to listen to the rest of the podcast, absolutely. But he'll go over how to get a hold of us by email or by voicemail. We love to actually hear from you and hear your voices. It's almost as good as being able to see you in person and give you a monster hug or whatever, or a fist bump, whatever you're cool with, or a wave. Tentacle or hand or whatever we've got, you know? No, I'm kidding. But I'm wondering, would any Monster Kids, if we happen to be in your city, because we are looking at doing some traveling, going to some different conventions coming up in the next year in 2025, I'm really excited for some of that. And if we happen to be in your city and you were able to come to, say, a talk on a particular monster movie or on the Godzilla franchise as a whole, or any of these topics, and then maybe watch a screening of the relevant movie, is that something you would come out to if we helped arrange that when we're going to be in a city anyway? Because Derek can talk about these things for hours, and it's so fascinating to sit and listen to him and then be able to ask questions, and I would love to share more of that with you Monster Kids. I love it, but I know you would love it even more, because I know many of you have been following him for a decade or more, and we do love you. I'm so blessed to be part of the Monster family, and I feel so grateful that everybody's taken to me and brought me in to this world, and so excited to watch all of these movies for the first or for the first time with my honey, either way. And I'm just really grateful to be here and be talking about Godzilla, who's one of my favorites. Not my favorite, that's Mothra, but one of my favorites, and definitely the king.
He is the king of the monsters. He really is. And listeners, I love this idea. This is not something Beth has run by me before.
Something I've been looking into in the Phoenix area, him being able to do. So I wondered if we were in your city, wherever your city is, and you'll have to let us know if that's something you'd be interested in there. I might be willing to set it up at multiple locations.
Okay. Well, we'll look into that. Yeah, definitely drop me a line on that.
We've done similar at the Joy, where Derek's talked about movies, introduced them, and then we've all watched the movie, and then sometimes afterwards sat around and had some great talks about different parts of the movie. And of course, we love the Joy, and when we're in Portland, that's where we're gonna go. But in other cities, we want to know what your local theater is, where you love to go watch your favorite monster movies, and if you would like to see it, and what movie you would most like to see and discuss.
Yeah, that would be the challenge because we want to make sure we get the rights to do it. But yeah, we'll look into that. Before we close out the Godzilla conversation, anything else you want to throw in there or say or comment on? I think we've covered a lot. I think you've covered a lot, which is great because people can listen to me talk about Godzilla in previous episodes. This is the first time for you. I love Godzilla. I mean, this is a great film. I think it's fascinating to look at where Godzilla started when he gets into being like clearly a kid's movie franchise.
Yeah.
Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you.
Oh.
Did it surprise you that he died at the end? Because it did me the first time I saw it. I was like, wait a minute. But there's more movies. I don't but he's dead. How did that hit you?
I guess I always assumed since each of the Godzillas seemed to be slightly different, right? They change each time.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily?
Yeah,
they seem slightly different. Like, even if the fins on the back are different or little things.
So, like, Shin Godzilla is different than -1.
Right.
But the one, like, when I talked about the 90s series, that is an actual series, same Godzilla all the way through.
Okay. But I mean, the different series or the different sections, because there are eras, is that what we call them?
Yes, yeah. This
Shin
is Showa
era,
Heisei,
yeah.
And then the modern era, and then, well, not really modern, but kind of, and then the legendary series, which is what's happening over here, and then I don't know what you call what's going on over there now. And
okay, well, anyway.
Even Heisei's and misnomer.
Each of those kind of has their own incarnation.
Yeah.
Or a couple incarnations in some cases. Sometimes there are slight changes. And some of that, I think, can be attributed to point of view.
Sure.
Because if you asked for a sketch artist, if you had somebody work with a sketch artist and you had 8 different people do it with 8 different sketch artists from the same monster, you're going to get 8 different pictures. Let's be honest.
Sure.
So some of that can be from that. Some of that can be from evolution. And I always just kind of assumed that it was actually that there were like a clutch of eggs that were evolving or something, one by one as they heated up or something like that. And that there were maybe undersea creatures, and then every once in a while one egg was evolved enough to come up onto land and wreak havoc because there was just so much radiation. And so I just figured there were different Godzilla just like there were different kaiju. Okay.
So it's the Showa era, the Heisei era, which is kind of a misnomer because of reasons. The Millennium era is after that. Then you've got the Monsterverse, which is the American side of things. And then I apologize for mispronouncing this one. Reiwa era?
Reiwa, yeah.
Era. That's the one that we're in now.
Okay.
And these are typically named after the reigning emperor who's in charge.
Okay.
So the Showa era was when Emperor Showa was in charge.
Okay.
Whatever. And then Heisei the same, but again, there's questions there.
Sure.
It shook me. I was like, well, how is Godzilla dead? I don't understand, because I know there's Godzilla Raids again. I've got it ready to go. I'm going to watch it next. I don't understand. How do they bring him back? Well, this episode isn't about Godzilla Raids again, so I don't want to address that. But they do bring him back. Sort of. Not really. Scratch all of that. Watch Godzilla Raids again after you watch Godzilla the original, because it's such a classic.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Well, that sounds like a Valentine's date. We'll have to do that for...
We're going to watch Godzilla Raids again for Valentine's Day?
Sure. Well, we'll have to watch it in advance so we can release it. I don't know what day of the week Valentine's is on. Here, let me look it up while we're talking. What else were you going to say?
That was it. I wanted to bring that up and just kind of get your take on, oops, Godzilla dead.
Okay, so Valentine's Day is on a Friday this year, so we should release our thing on that Monday before, I think. So we'll have to watch it a little in advance, but that's okay because we don't really like Valentine's Day anyway, so we'll do something else on that night.
We'll talk about Godzilla Raids again on Valentine's Day / President's Day on Monster Kid Radio, on the Bride of Monster Kid Radio.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of The Bride of Monster Kid Radio. You can find out everything that you need to know about the podcast over at the website, monsterkidradio.net, where you're going to find links to everything that we've talked about here on the show. We even have an Amazon affiliate link. You know, it is the season while people are hopping online and spending a lot of money over at Amazon. And if you're going to do that, please consider using the Amazon affiliate link that we have on our website. It doesn't cost you anything extra. If you click on that, it takes you straight to Amazon. It just takes a penny or two out of Jeff Bezos' pocket and puts it into the Monster Kid Radio coffers, and it really helps out. So please consider doing that. Also, we've got links to our Facebook page and Facebook group, our X, our Discord, our Reddit, and our Patreon. And as I've been telling everybody, follow us over on Patreon. You don't have to subscribe or become a patron, but if you follow us on Patreon, when I release the vlog, the video, The House of Monster Kid Radio later this month, you're going to get it because we're going to put the December one up for free for everybody. And then starting in January, if you want to get The House of Monster Kid Radio on a monthly basis, you do need to become a paying patron at the $5 level or higher. But the first one is free. So make sure you follow us over there so that you are notified when that House of Monster Kid Radio episode becomes available. We've got a lot coming up here at The Bride of Monster Kid Radio. As Beth mentioned, we're already looking as far ahead as Valentine's Day, where we're going to be talking about Godzilla raids again in February. But between now and then, we've got a lot of other shows and a lot of other things to talk about. And next week, I'm going to dip into some of the files that I've been sitting on for a little while now. You remember Steve Turek? Remember Steve, the guy who does the Diecast Movie podcast? You know, the guy who steps in whenever I can't do an episode of Monster Kid Radio. Well, he recorded 3 episodes of the podcast while I was moving from the Pacific Northwest to the Southwest, and I'm going to use one of those for next week. So next week, we've got Steve Turek talking with filmmaker Ansel Faraj about the 1942 film Night Monster. So make sure you come back for that. Bride of Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Bride of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death, our other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, the Team Death YouTube channel, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. All previous episodes of this podcast, as well as the original Monster Kid Radio podcast, are available at www.monsterkidradio.net. Please rate and review Bride of Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Catsumi is copyright 2024 Cosmic Chickens. You can find them at cosmicchickens.bandcamp.com. Go check out their self-titled album. Pick it up and let them know that the Bride of Monster Kid Radio sent you. But you might want to say it in French because they're based out of Normandy, France, and everything on their Bandcamp page is in French, and I can't read that. But it's a great album. Seriously, go check it out. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week when we have Steve Turek and Ansel Faraj here talking about Night Monster. Ciao.